You know, the two things that bring on change the most in people: desperation and embarrassment. But last year, CJ Stroud went through the whole podcast circuit, right? He seemed like he was on a podcast every other day, whether it was Micah Parsons, whether it was some like random strength coach. He was crowning himself the greatest quarterback of all time.
He's a cowboy. He's a cowboy. He's naturally doing.
There you go. Now, he didn't say top, greatest quarterback ever, but he did have himself firmly in the top five. Firmly in the top five. And this bothered a lot of people. I personally didn't care. Like, I think you can go on a podcast for 5 minutes after your full day of working out. I don't think it's that big a deal. Like, to me, it comes off very shut up and throw the football, kind of like LeBron, shut up and dribble. I didn't really care that he was doing the podcast. I will admit that I might have been in the minority there, that I didn't care. How did you feel about it at the time?
Yeah,
Did it bother you?
I think at the time I kind of said I wouldn't have done it, but as long as he keeps playing the way he's played in year one, then I don't think there's anything to say about it. I think I basically said, you can have that criticism if he had a bad year, but he had a good year.
Like, was his second year, I wouldn't say was like bad, right? Like, it wasn't as good as year one.
He just takes a lot of blame for it.
And then I would also say, like, did he take a step back statistically in year two versus year one because he was podcasting, or was it because he had a bad offensive line?
Because he had a bad offensive line.
Yeah, that would be my response. Yep. Lamont says, I called several shows last year, voiced my concern about CJ yapping so much on podcast and calling for blah, blah, blah. All radio personalities and the Texans fanboys was like, it's nothing with that. My thing was we don't see quarterbacks doing that. And I will agree with Lamont there. We don't see a lot of quarterbacks doing the whole podcast tour, especially after their rookie year. Well, Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans are doing their own little podcast media tour right now at the Combine. And it sounds to me like they've been pretty critical of the CJ Stroud podcast circuit last year. Here was Nick Caserio yesterday. He was on with PFT, Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio, Chris Sims. He actually knows Chris Sims pretty well because Sims spent a little bit of time with New England. Whenever Nick Caserio was there, I had forgotten about that, but then, it jotted my mind. It kind of jogged my mind, rather, because they talked about it. So here was Caserio about Stroud learning a lesson maybe from last offseason.
You're from New England. It's on to Cincinnati. Don't really ever say anything. He was very public in media appearances in the offseason last year. Is there a point where do you have a talk with him about that?
I think players kind of have to learn some of this as you go. Right. And you got to understand, these are young players, and they come in the league, and sometimes a lot is thrown at them. And they have to, look, in the end, you got to figure things out on your own. What works, what doesn't work, a little bit more of this, a little bit less of that. But ultimately, whomever the player is, the focus has to be on work and improvement in the offseason, and you can make a lot of progress and a lot of gains if that's where the focus is.
He doesn't really answer the question, but he's like, your focus should be on your work.
He's hinting a little bit. Yeah.
So, that's positive or negative based on CJ Stroud's offseason a year ago?
Look, I think that the positive is that whether there's any truth behind it, the notion that whether it took away from time on football and it was a distraction that way, time commitment otherwise, that CJ, it's been known, and they've put it out there in multiple different interviews that they've done, that CJ is basically taking a step back to focus more on football. And I think that is the best thing that you could have come out of this, regardless of how you feel about him doing just podcasts.
Okay, yeah, probably true. But do you think Caserio is more critical here or not critical?
I think he's annoyed.
Okay. I would say that's probably synonymous.
So it leans on critical.
With critical.
It would lean on critical. I don't know how much he's willing to go and address it with CJ, as much as he's basically not exactly sitting back, relaxing, and saying, it's no big deal.
Okay. Yeah. I'm more critical than not critical here.
I would say he definitely didn't want to talk about it much in the media, you could tell. He doesn't want to talk about a lot of things like that through the media, but that last part where he says, if that's where the focus is, seems to imply to me he didn't think that's where Stroud's focus was last offseason.
Or at the very least, that the focus should be on the work.
Yes.
Here's another one from Nick Caserio making the rounds and, Combine Row. This one's on with McAfee on what the next few months need to look like for CJ Stroud.
I think CJ is going to have a really good offseason. He's going to be committed to making himself a better football player, that's where the focus should be.
That right there in a nut. And I didn't hear the rest of the quote, but if that.
Well, he kind of got word salad and started talking about other things.
Yeah, that in a nutshell basically tells you all you need to hear.
The work should be on the work.
Well, especially since the previous clip we played was a completely different, show that he was on. He basically kind of said the same thing.
Different show.
Yeah.
That first one was on with PFT Florio Sims. This one was on with McAfee. Okay, well, there's the general manager. How about the head coach? How about Cap? How about D'Amico Ryans? D'Amico Ryans had a one-on-one with Cameron Wolfe, the best NFL football reporter on NFL Network, and not even NFL Network, across the league. Cameron Wolfe is the very best. Go Cougs. D'Amico.
I was just going to ask.
So anyways, I mean.
Our beloved Cougs.
Cameron Wolfe brought up, what do you, blah, 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 CJ Stroud. And D'Amico touched on what Stroud has to do this offseason.
CJ he has to take a step back, right, and really dive into the offseason, right? And that's where your season is won. Like, how are you putting that work into in the offseason? Like, how are you hitting the weight room? Like, how are you detailing your craft and improving that and bringing other guys along with you? And I think CJ is going to be much better. He's going to have a much better offseason this time around.
Much better offseason means that you think he has a lot of room of improvement from the previous offseason. This is obvious.
And he said, take a step
this
back.
This is plain as day. Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryan. Look, I don't agree with them, but Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans very clearly were not too pleased with CJ Stroud's offseason a year ago.
Yeah, I think if you want to take it to the point of not too pleased or just use this as kind of a learning lesson, because I'm not sure that they're going to show him that they're really upset about it. I think it's basically just like, hey, what you did last year didn't work. It's time to reevaluate some things. And then you go from there. Because, I mean, we heard stories in the offseason about his building relationships with Diggs and building relationships with Mixon. And
on
doing
their
some
podcast.
Well, but also, like, he paid – I think he paved the way for everybody, including those guys, to go some off-site, throwing camps and things like that. So I don't know how much more he needs to do. He taught the rookies handshakes. So
I don't think that they liked him on the podcast stuff. And look, I think it's a little football hardo. Let's react on the other side. 713-780-ESPN. 3 clips, all from yesterday, 2 from the GM on 2 different shows, 1 from D'Amico Ryans with the greatest NFL reporter currently in the business. He's not fighting at Starbucks, Cameron Wolfe, that all very clearly say that CJ Stroud's offseason can get a lot better than it was from a year ago. XX says, I think CJ's embarrassed he's hiding this offseason. The 2 things that bring on change the most in people: desperation and embarrassment. I learned that in psychology class. I love good psychology from time to time. Hey, why did you put the bag of coffee grounds on the top of the coffee?
Because the lid wouldn't stay shut.
Really?
Yeah. It's a brand new coffee pot, but people are abusing it already, so I wanted to make sure that the pot brewed. So just to make sure, I put the coffee on top of
the suits upstairs are going to that coffee machine like Luca goes through a pack of cigarettes.
How are they abusing it?
Using it a lot.
The other day that they didn't take it off the heater on the bottom after they emptied all but like a quarter of an inch of liquid, and it became a science project on the bottom of crusty, burnt stuff.
Yeah. Brian, why don't you leave this up to the coffee drinkers? You sit this
I
one
was
out.
asking out of genuine curiosity because I have no idea how you'd abuse a coffee maker.
Texture, my only problem with CJ going on pods, it was talking like he's a top 5 quarterback already and then had the season he had. See, I don't care that my quarterback thinks he's a top 5 quarterback. Like, I actually like my quarterbacks to be cocky, arrogant, and confident. I much rather them think they're a top 5 quarterback than be like, I'm not sure I belong in the NFL. Like, I want an arrogant, brash, bravado quarterback. I don't care that he said he was in the top 5.
I think in any position, in any sport that you play, I just had a teachable moment coaching the girls softball team this way, and I was talking to my buddy who coaches his son in basketball, and it's the same thing. You got to teach them from a young age on that if you're playing not to lose and you're playing scared or not turn it over or make a mistake, you're going to make mistakes and turn it over. When you play with confidence and believe that you could do anything when you're on the court of the field, good things are going to happen, and I think that's a tough thing to teach some kids.
Newt Rockney, Nick Saban, Bill Belichick, Joel Blank, the most inspirational coaches that ever. No, it's a good lesson. I'm just teasing, having some fun with it. But no, you need to be confident. It's like, I couldn't care less that CJ Stroud thinks he's a top 5 quarterback. I didn't care less that he was going on podcast. I think it's, again, very shut up and dribble. Space City Kev, I'm not reading that text, dude. Like, that's a dissertation. That's way too long. Sum it down into like 2 sentences tops. Look at that thing. How many words do you think that text from Space City Kev is? Third one from the top. That's like 500 words.
Yeah, that's definitely not making it on Twitter.
We need 2 sentences there, Space City. Texter, yeah.
Unless you're Patrick Great.
You got to pay for the blue check mark in order to get that one on Twitter. We don't pay for the blue check mark unless you're farming engagement. Texter, when you've seen the greatest work ethic of all time in Tom Brady, anything less can be seen as not doing enough. That's an interesting take.
But, I mean, I know it's not quite the same thing, but he was doing the show with Jim Gray while he was an active player. So it's not like Tom Brady was never doing a podcast.
Yeah, he was doing a 3-minute radio hit for Monday Night Football
Well,
halftime.
that was what made it onto the broadcast, but he was doing more than 3 minutes with Jim Gray.
He was also friends with Jim Gray.
I know, I'm just saying. It's like, if we're going to talk about
very good friend.
What would Tom Brady do, Tom Brady did do podcasts.
Like it was like CJ Stroud. It was not CJ. It was Brady, Jim Gray.
Larry Fitzgerald.
Wasn't Oprah part of that clique? I think she was. I know
Jim Gray and Braun because he did the decision.
Yeah, he did.
Handpicked.
Yeah, there was some weird click there. I don't like when ESPN gives kudos to the Texans or the Rockets or the Astros and all the kudos at ESPN, even Charles Barkley. It was a bad luck charm. Yeah, I kind of see where you're coming from there. Podcasts weren't the issue. His play was, and it wasn't just on the O-line. Fair point. Tom Brady was in movies and doing TV shows. It's true. I forgot about the movie. He was in Ted. Remember, he was in Ted? Ted was funny. I never saw
Ted.
The
Was really funny. I enjoyed it.
Did you see Ted 2?
I watched it. I just remembered not being nearly as funny.
I think I turned it off.
Yeah, it wasn't Zoolander too bad, but it was not as good as the original.
I remember watching bits and pieces of it, and I was like, I'm not watching this. Texture says I blame Amber Rose. CJ Stroud.
A lot of people do.
But Stroud tried to make it very clear that he was not with Amber Rose. Like, he was going around cars, so they were not, like, walking side by side. But maybe. Let's go out to the HRP listener line, 713-780-3776. Is this MLA Paul? I wonder if this is MLA Paul. Is this you?
Hey, guys. I enjoy the show. I'd much rather him do a podcast than our previous quarterback activities. And, I don't have a problem with the podcast. A lot of players do these, have shows after the game or, during the week. So I don't have a problem with it. And I do think he's a top 5 talent. But, this kid, I would be a little gun shy myself if I was playing behind that line. So, guys, he's a good kid. They're just making a mountain out of a molehill.
Appreciate it, Paul. I love that line, mountain out of a molehill. I agree with everything Paul said. I think this is sensationalism. I don't think it mattered that much. Yes, he is far better character than Deshaun Watson.
Low bar to clear.
Very, very low bar to clear. But yes, you're technically right. He is a far better character guy than Deshaun Watson. But I think it is very evident that Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans don't want a repeat of next year's offseason. I think it's very obvious.
It's interesting from the standpoint that when things are going good, no one's ever going to mention the podcast. But you look at what's going on now, and I think Micah Parsons has had to address it multiple times in the last couple of weeks about it being an issue with the Cowboys, too, and them saying the same thing and saying maybe he should step away from the podcast. Paul George, as of last night's game, decided he's putting the podcast on hold for a while to really concentrate on basketball. So he, when you feel that kind of extra kind of added thing that someone could blame, some people are just eliminating it because a lot more people are starting to point at those things as distractions.
Yeah. Texture says maybe the podcast become annoying when you think the player isn't working hard enough away from them. That's probably the truest thing. Like, you wouldn't care if a guy Brady was podcasting whenever Tom Brady every breathing moment whenever he's not doing an interview or like filming a movie, which is probably in the off season, that he's working the absolute most. I just wouldn't think CJ Stroud would be a guy who coasts. Like that to me doesn't seem to add up.
But that maybe is the concern, that from everything that they've seen since they talked to him pre-draft into the draft process to when they've had him, and especially through that first year, they believed exactly what you just said. And then when he started feeling good about himself after his rookie season, maybe they saw that change. And the easiest thing to say is at the front of the list is the podcast to blame, but maybe it was just a complete change from what they were used to seeing in terms of his overall dedication to football.
Yeah. It's it'll be interesting to see what this offseason looks like, and then it'll be very interesting to see what he looks like in season.
I just think too the other thing is because of we're blaming a podcast. To the caller's point,
I'm
Paul,
not blaming a podcast.
No, I know, but I'm just saying to Paul's point, it could be a hell of a lot worse. It doesn't have to be Deshaun worse. But I mean, he's a man of faith. He preaches it daily. He seems to live his life in a very clean clean way. I don't think I'm worried about him, overly clubbing and drinking. I don't even think he drinks. So, if you want to blame podcasts, go ahead. I think the main thing for me is if he's going to spend even more time kind of getting into the playbook, especially with the new OC, and working on more football related stuff, it's a benefit.
How do you feel about Luka drinking and smoking?
I mean, I'm to the point where if Luka gets you 27 a game and he can carry you as far as he can carry a team basically all by himself, I've seen it, been with enough franchises to realize they let the main player get away with a lot if they're that good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did Barkley drink a little bit?
Yeah. Did James Harden? And did James Harden go to strip clubs every night?
Did Michael Jordan have a little fun on the side?
Maybe.
James Harden had a great work ethic. I've heard. Seriously. Sincerely. I sincerely say that.
Except for when he wanted to get Kevin McHale fired.
Well, I mean, he did get Kevin McHale
I know,
fired,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He came into the season fat.
I think that
bodysuits.
Two things can be true. I think
I agree with that.
Yeah, because I think that no matter what kind of work ethic you have about the game of basketball, if you're out all night at strip clubs and you're drinking, recovery is a little more difficult.
I don't know why I end that. You're right. Yes, you're right. I can't argue that.